On this episode of The Wish Kids, we have a very special guest who's a little bit older than us and can provide us with some different insight on what it's like to be diagnosed with cancer at an older age, especially if you're not a teenager or a teenager, what that is like. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of The Wish Kids. Alex, who is a two-time cancer survivor.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us. It's amazing to have you here.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so I met Alex this summer while we filmed the Hydro Flask commercial. Just one of the fun things we did this summer.
A few episodes back, we talked about our summers, but obviously you weren't here. So what have you been up to this summer?
Yeah, well, yesterday was my dad's 70th birthday, so it was nice to see some of my family that I hadn't gotten to
Yay.
see for a while due to COVID. And then a fun cancer-related thing that I am doing is training for triathlons. I'm not sure if either of you are familiar with Team in Training or LLS, the Leukemia Lymphoma Society, but I just met my fundraising minimum goal, and I am just trying to bike and walk in condition before the actual team stuff starts in November.
Yeah, I was in the city, I think last week, and they were setting up they have Escape from Alcatraz triathlon. Is that the one you're doing, or is it a different one?
No, I'm going to Lava Man in Hawaii, so I'm going to do a really fun one. But it'll actually be my 5 years post bone marrow transplant in April 7th, and the triathlon's April 3rd. So just a really good way to celebrate.
That's
Oh my
awesome.
gosh, I love that.
Yeah.
That's so cool. So you said it was for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. Is that the type of cancer you had, or?
Sure is. I had Hodgkin's lymphoma.
Okay, very cool. So one of the big reasons you're here, obviously you're a good friend of Milan's, but you were diagnosed as an adult. Unlike us, we were diagnosed as kids and teens. So what was that like? What was the process of your diagnosis like as an adult?
It was wild. I mean, just getting diagnosed is a weird thing, especially when you are young, because that's not what nurses and doctors, maybe their first idea is that this 26-year-old person has cancer who hasn't had any sort of other medical oddities, I suppose. And for me, it was a 6-month process of getting diagnosed because I had a bunch of lumps in my neck and I got a bunch of biopsies and they all kept coming back benign. And so I was like, yeah, I don't have cancer, whatever, I don't have cancer. It's cool, it's cool, it's cool. Until I met with a cardiothoracic surgeon. I was like, yeah, they keep telling me I don't have cancer, but I don't know, it feels like these are growing in my neck, but I don't have it, so it's fine. And he stopped in his track and was like, I need you to get a different biopsy with a different person, and referred me out. And then that person had biopsied all areas of my neck and found both benign and malignant tumors.
Whoa.
Yeah, but it
Wow.
took 6 months because of my age.
Wow.
So that was just because they figured you as a healthy adult, and so they that was the back of their mind. They weren't really thinking that as a priority for it.
Yeah, and I guess there was other stuff going on because these lumps were benign, and I ended up having a mass in my chest that was a goiter, which is something related to your thyroid.
Mm-hmm.
And so it wasn't cancer there. And so that's actually why I visited the cardiothoracic surgeon, because they were going to have to break open my breastbone to remove it. Because I was like, I'm vain. I don't want these on my neck anymore. I'm 26 and looking to date. And so I was like, please remove these. And then when I met with him about that consult on the surgery and was describing what they felt like, he was like, "Ugh, let's check this out one more time."
That's so interesting. Yeah, because mine was similar where it took a little bit. It didn't take 6 months for me, but it took several weeks, and because I had bruises that just wouldn't go away. And they're like, "Oh, just drink more Gatorade and drink more water." And I was like, "No, that's not it." But it's good you kept pushing for it, and especially that you had a doctor that helped you like that, advocate for you and say you need to get this checked out more.
And that you
Yeah.
got a second opinion, because I think that's really important, is that you went out of your way to make that your doctor made sure you got a second opinion too.
Yeah, and I don't think this was me, right? I avoided going to the doctor first. My mom was the one who was
Mm.
like, I really need you to go get these checked out. So I was like, whatever, maybe it'll go away. And I waited initially 2 months when they started. And then I was like, well, I guess it could be thyroid cancer. And so I read more about that. And then all of the benign stuff came back and I was like, no, it's not. But I did have a solid medical team, which is not the case for a lot of people, right?
Mhm.
So I do feel pretty fortunate. But I did have also plenty of nurses and doctors tell me that no, it's not cancer, you're too young. So a mixed bag, but grateful that, it was caught
That it was that they got it very early on. You mentioned that your mom was kind of advocating for you to go. So, kind of like, how did your mom go with you to all of your appointments, or how did you tell your family and friends if you told them at all?
Yeah, so my mom didn't go with me. Like I was living with my parents at the time, so she came with like surgeries and big stuff. But normal appointments, I by myself because I could, and Kaiser was close. That's who my provider is. And then because it took so long to get diagnosed, my family knew. My best friends, I was like, oh, another doctor's appointment. Like it's fine, it's fine. And they're like, oh, good, good. So they were kept like very close in the loop. And then when I actually got my diagnosis, we had a cancer reveal party per se, maybe a get together. It wasn't like a celebration, but it was at one of my friend's house, and like we invited people over for dinner, and it was super weird, but a good place to tell my close friends because I also had my friends who knew able to speak on my behalf because like I couldn't
Mhm.
get the words out without like breaking down.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's a,
Wow.
I've never heard of a cancer reveal party, but it doesn't seem like the worst idea. Like it sounds a little funny coming out of my mouth saying that, but like it seems like smart to have everyone in the like all your close friends in the same area just to tell them all at once. It's not something you have to keep re-explain to people, and
Hmm.
then that way you already have like a support group of sorts, like people who know what you're going through and who are like able to help you and stuff, which is always great.
Yeah, and I posted it on the internet because I'm a millennial and it was 2015, but only
That's
after.
funny. Yeah, I actually, speaking of like having a good support group, did you ever go to those, or like, did anyone recommend you go to those types of support groups that are kind of like in your group therapy almost?
Yeah, so I was shocked at the lack of information that my like medical team had on young adult stuff and more of that emotional or holistic pieces, or even like the mental health pieces, which I think support groups play like a huge role in. And so when I was originally diagnosed, no, I thought it was going to be 3 to 6 months of chemo. I didn't need any help. I was just going to do it. I didn't want to see anyone. I didn't want anyone to see me weak or bald or sad. And so I was like, whatever, I'm just going to get through it. And after this, everything's going to be back to normal and fine, which like is not true. But
Hmm.
I looked at one because there was one at El Camino Hospital. I live in San Jose, and this is in Mountain View, and it's called Healthy Young Attitude. And it's 18 to 39 AYA group, but we have all sorts of people in the group. And I was too scared to go. So I looked it up and I kept missing meetings, like, oh, it was yesterday, I guess. And it wasn't until I relapsed that I was like, I need help. I need a bigger community. I need more resources. I'm scared.
Yeah. I
And now
think
I've been going since spring of 2016. And I still go. We have a virtual right
that was going to be my next question if you
now.
still went, because I think
I do.
even with kids, like I didn't have cancer, but I've had like a life-threatening medical condition. But meeting up with like kids from Make-A-Wish, like Matthew, that I've been able to have like those friends that kind of understand what I'm going through, and I don't have to take the time to explain like, no, I can't hang out today. Like I'm exhausted, and they'll like automatically know why I'm feeling that way. And I think that's a great kind of trade off of just not having to explain it, but you have your, regular friends, but then you have your support group friends.
And the dark humor friends. I mean, you can joke about like the crudest stuff and it's okay. Whereas, you say it to what we call cancer muggles. I'm not sure if anyone follows the cancer patient on Instagram. Highly recommend. But cancer muggles that are like very horrified by some of the jokes or statements.
That's a good way of putting it. Yeah, I've had that same thing where it's like, but also it's nice to have those people who aren't like afflicted by it, and so it's like almost like a return to normalcy when you hang out with them, and then you can be like, okay, I want to focus on my illness over here with my other friends, and so it's like
Yeah,
the two
having a
sides.
wide group of people to like, that's what that support system is.
Hmm. That's really good that you had that though, especially like as an adult with that. 'Cause I'm sure that can be difficult because as kids, like going through like middle school and high school, you're surrounded by friends all the time at school, but as an adult, it's not as easy. It seems like.
I think it's hard to make friends as an adult sometimes. But yeah, it's a common bond kind of thing. And I think lots of different communities have that kind of stuff, which is a nice resource.
Yeah, that's great. So what was it like? Obviously, we had our parents along the way. You said your mom would come to surgeries and stuff, but what was it like being just like the main person, like having to like advocate for yourself and like just like I guess like the main like chief and like commander in your medical journey?
It's so hard. So my mom was, when you go through cancer, you have to have a caregiver like on paper. And my mom was still my caregiver. And like I said, I lived at home while I was going through that first 6 months of treatment. But like I didn't want to be the one to research and read all of these awful things about my illness. And I like didn't, but I also wanted to stay informed and also know what my best like treatment plan was going to be. I put a lot of faith in my oncologist. But was actually like the worst about having cancer at this age group, or that was that I had just gotten like my first salaried benefited job and navigating insurance. I was on my own insurance because I was 26 years old. I had just gotten bumped off my dad's. And I didn't know if I would qualify for FMLA, which is the Family Medical Leave Act. I didn't know if I would lose my job. I didn't know if I'd have to pay for Cobra. I couldn't afford to pay for Cobra to keep my insurance. And that was a really difficult process to have to focus on like EDD and disability stuff rather than focus on my health. So that's what sucked the most.
Whoa, that's actually something that I didn't really like, that didn't click until you just said that. And now I definitely am going to go talk to my parents about my plan when I'm no longer a teenager, because I think that's something that's really important. And I don't think it's talked about at all, especially for kids who are diagnosed with medical problems way younger, that like, what happens when you are older and when you have a job, because
Because your insurance is tied to your employer, which one of the questions I think was like, how has cancer impacted me? Like, I'm a healthcare advocate, and I don't think that those two things should be tied. I'm even looking at COVID right now with everyone losing their job.
It is really like challenging when when you start realizing those things that are tied to other things, and then you can't have one thing because you don't have the other thing, and it's just a big kind of process.
Yeah.
And so many folks in this age group, in this, like I, again, was very fortunate. I had a job. I was eligible for FMLA. The monetary impact, like paying for cancer is a whole thing. And like, there's a lot of people in this AYA community that go bankrupt because they're sick. And like, that shouldn't be the case for anyone.
Yeah.
I want to go back to what you said about like the research stuff, because that's a huge part of it, is like doing your own research as the patient and like seeing, like making sure like you're getting the right and like correct treatment. Because I know for me, like during my treatment, that was no, I don't want to say it was my mom's job, but like it was like she did like the large majority of that. Like she would like every night she would like be like on Google for hours, and like even in the hospital with me, she would be sitting on the bedside like looking up different things and medicines and what they do. So I can't imagine like having to do that by myself while like actually getting the treatment as well. That must have been a lot.
I didn't. Like I said, it was too depressing. My oncologist gave me options. Luckily for me, so I had classical Hodgkin's lymphoma. There's really only a few routes you can take. They're all pretty similar. It was when I relapsed that there are a lot more options available. So that's when like the egg freezing came into play. That's when I was offered a clinical trial, but was too late for one of them, and then offered 3 that I took my oncologist's advice. And then the actual bone marrow transplant, there weren't too many options. It was a pretty regimented procedure for mine, which was autologous, which means we used my own blood cells. I didn't have a donor. Not almost. I think it was harder for her to see me go through this, which I'm sure you both can relate to, than it was for me. Because my end game is like, just stay alive. That's your only goal. But I know that she would have done everything she could to trade places, to fix it. But to have to watch your kid like go through it, and also watch me as an adult, so she has no real decision-making power, was hard.
You actually mentioned you were like weren't eligible. There was like a clinical trial mentioned kind of there. And there was a clinical trial offered to me once, and there were so many forms. And I just wanted to know, like, what was that process like for you with the clinical trial?
I was offered a clinical trial immediately after like I relapsed, but I took, and which was in like June was when it was confirmed that I still had Hodgkin's lymphoma. And then my options were like to do egg freezing or to like start this clinical trial, or start like another one after, and then I was no longer eligible. But another one popped up in the fall. And like I said before, I'm a Kaiser patient, but I was referred out to Stanford for clinical trials and for the bone marrow transplant. So it was good because Stanford is a leader in lymphoma, and it was really cool to have a medical experience where they care about like the whole human rather than maybe just like a patient number. So when I went through the clinical trial, I got a lot of attention, a really good team that like cared about my overall well-being. The paperwork, I had a lot of interviews, is what I feel like it was. So a lot of asking me about like what medication I was taking or things like that, confirming that I wasn't doing anything I wasn't supposed to be doing. And it was a lot of like verbal interviews before I actually was accepted into the trial. But I was recommended by my oncologist, so it went pretty fast.
I say, just to explain to people who might not know, like a clinical trial is just when you're trying out a new drug or a new type of therapy, right?
Yeah, it's not necessarily like the drug is like safe enough to use, but they don't know if they want to make it part of people's treatment plans yet because it hasn't been tested. Like its success hasn't been tested enough. That's my understanding, at least for what I was doing.
Well, I actually think that's really cool that you kind of like went through that process because I don't really know many people who've committed or like been through the trials to like get there. So did the clinical trial end up working or how was that?
Yeah, so it was a new drug that's a biologic. So it was an immunotherapy, meaning that I wouldn't lose my hair, which again, I've said vanity in your mid to late 20s. It was like pretty important to me. So I was excited. And the whole thing was that it was going to provide less toxicity for my body, yada, yada. And it would take 3 more years for me to have the transplant. So like there's 2 routes. I could do this, less toxicity, more time, immunotherapy rather than chemo, or I could do salvage chemotherapy and the bone marrow transplant within like 6 months. And so I picked this like lower toxicity one. But I ended up being like going into anaphylaxis with one of the drugs, and my tongue swelled up and my lips swelled up, and I had millions of blisters underneath the palms and like the skin of my feet. And help. And I remember calling the emergency line, and they're like, "Yeah, go to the ER." And Kaiser wouldn't help me because I was like, "I'm on a clinical trial." And they're like, "Well, we don't want to give you steroids because you'll get kicked off." And I remember going to Stanford 3 years later, and they were like, "You could have died in your sleep." Like they should have given you, you're not on the clinical trial anymore. You're getting a steroid and you're going home.
Oh my
Holy
goodness, that's
Yeah.
scary. Plus on top of everything else you're dealing with.
But I had hair.
That's important.
Yeah, you gotta weigh the pros and cons, right? I mean,
Yeah. But so that was, I think, one of the most interesting things to me was that like the ER, like I made the wrong decision for my safety.
Yeah.
So I'm glad everything was okay. But yeah, they
Yes, I'm
immediately
glad
gave
you're
me,
okay.
they gave me a steroid, and immediately like 20 minutes later the swelling had
Yeah,
reduced.
we're a steroid prednisone family up here. We love that.
yeah.
That's what did it.
So I'm assuming you kind of went back to chemo after that.
Yeah, I took the traditional route of what is called platinum or salvage chemotherapy. So that was like overnight chemo in the hospital. So it's inpatient chemo. And that one was to like falsify a remission for me, because then you go through something called the apheresis process, which is the stem cell collection. So basically they're giving me just a lot of chemo to be like, here's a clean scan. And then they're trying to take all those cells while they're clean so that they can transplant them back.
Did you learn any kind of like chemo hacks?
Oh, coconut water. I have a potassium
Oh.
deficiency, and so the electrolytes in coconut water helped. I could absorb that like better than a banana.
Yeah, I love coconut water. Big fan.
So how did your friends and family react after you relapsed? Because I think that's like really scary that everyone thinks you're kind of like doing better. And then did you have kind of a second cancer reveal party for that one?
I don't remember. So it was, what was weird is that during my checkups, like I was really responding super well to the chemotherapy. Like I believe at 3 months there was no cancer on my PET scan. And then after the 6 months of chemo, I had my first scan, and there was like some, I forget what they call it, like busyness activity on my scan. And so they asked me to come back in like 6 weeks and do another one. And then they confirmed that there was some like dark spots on it, like where that nuclear sugar, I don't know if you've had PET scans, but when they inject you with nuclear sugar, it goes to the cancer. You can see it on the scan. And so it was confirmed. And then I had to do another surgical biopsy to send it to the pathologist to make sure that it was lymphoma again and not a different type of cancer. So I think I was really worried that like it was not the same cancer, because that's one of the reasons my treatment plan did not include radiation because of the area it could have caused breast cancer as a side effect of radiation in the chest. So it felt okay that it was confirmed that it was still Hodgkin's and there was another treatment plan available, like a bone marrow transplant. If I relapse again, there's still another, like I could get a donor transplant. That would still be like an option. But for me, it felt like a death sentence, right? Like, what's next?
Right. Like, what else can you do?
Yeah. And my family, man, maybe I was just like too self-involved to think about their reaction. But again, I think because I had shared that like my scan wasn't clean both times, like people were aware that like something could happen. I think I was very open with feeling scared. I've not really hidden any parts of my experience because again, I thrive with that community, but we were sad.
So after the relapse, is that when you tried the clinical trial as like a way to like see, because you already had done like normal chemo for it and it didn't work super well.
It was chemo, egg freezing, clinical trial, bone marrow transplant prep, and then bone marrow transplant, which is a month in the hospital.
That's a long journey.
It was about 3 years of treatment, and I had some post like I forgot what they call it. There was another drug that we were testing to see if I wanted to stay on because it helped like lengthen survivorship, but I ended up getting really bad neuropathy. So they pulled me off it because it wasn't part of the standard treatment plan yet.
When you go through chemo, it's obviously going to affect your immune system. In a few episodes, Matthew and we were kind of talking about like quarantining before it was a thing, which I think you also mentioned you did a little bit.
Honestly felt better because the month before and the month after my transplant and the month in the middle I was in the hospital, I couldn't even open windows or vacuum. I couldn't go outside without the actual like HEPA Breaking Bad style mask. So the fact that I could still have a fan on during COVID was like a benefit because I don't have AC at my apartment.
Last question for you, because you've been amazing so far, but just what has been like your biggest takeaway from your journey?
My biggest takeaway is there's no time to be unhappy. Like it's not worth it. So I think everything that I do usually, I mean, there's still lots of things I don't like, but everything I do is still going to be rooted in happiness, and things that make me happy are like, giving back to my community and being with my friends and family and all that kind of stuff. So, but that was also, I don't know, that was something that I cared about before, but I really do encourage anyone who like is so unhappy with their job or their school or what they're doing to like not do it.
Yeah, it's very true. Like I've noticed that too. I think especially post treatment for me, where it's been like you don't do stuff that's like not fun.
Yeah, to enjoy your life.
I think this has been a really great episode, and thank you, Alex, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so as always, the Wish Kids wish you well.
Thank you to our moms for moderating and our dads for proving nods and occasional thumbs up.
We would also like to thank all of our wonderful nurses and doctors that we've had along the way and remind you that they are healthcare professionals, not us.
Please keep in mind, any medical information or stories shared and discussed in this podcast are based on personal experiences and are not meant to serve as medical advice. Please talk with your doctor about any medical concerns, questions, and guidance, as they are trained medical professionals.
Any brands, corporations, trademarks, or characters in the show, even those based on real people, are purely fictional.
The Wish Kids wish you well.